bad takes. Now, everyone has bad takes every now and again. So I wanted to make a video that looked at these bad takes and see why they're bad, but also, is there a way to actually defend them, and why would someone think this way? Now, of course, this is not going to be totally accurate because, sometimes a bad take can be, still liked by a lot of people, and it also depends on, my position. I'm not going to be counting the number order I do them in. It's a simple randomized order of 10 bad takes that I wanted to look at.
Super Sentai fight scenes only.
Now, I can kind of understand this position when it comes to the fight scenes in Super Sentai. Japan has been doing Super Sentai for, 40 plus years, so they understand how to act within the suits and how to do really cool fight scenes, and they spend more time and money into them. So when you compare a lot of scenes with the Japanese footage to the US footage of fight scenes, one definitely looks better in a lot of cases, but not all the time. Well, why don't they just simply use these Super Sentai fight scenes only and never shoot US footage? There's a couple of reasons why that happens. One, it's because the footage just doesn't allow it. Either because there's a character in there that, they can't use. Either it's a Japanese person or a Japanese ranger actor that's in the shot where they have to switch to US footage, and they have to combine the materials in order to cut out that bit. Another thing is censorship. Now, in Japan, a lot more things are allowed in the show, specifically minor blood, punching characters in the face, things like that. And unfortunately, they have to cut a lot of those things out whenever they do things. Costume is inappropriate in the PR version. I think a prime example would be Necroli in Mystic Force. Valkyria in Magi Ranger had a much more revealing costume. The netting below her breast line was much more darker, so you couldn't see her skin. So in majority of cases, all that footage of her in the Japanese version had to be completely replaced and reshot whenever they did her close-ups. The American teams have come a long way. It's not like we've started out in the beginning of MMPR where the fight teams were basically couldn't do anything because they couldn't afford ruining suits and fighting in general, or they were just not used to fighting with helmets on or helmet acting. So I really don't agree with this one, because ultimately the US team can do excellent fight scenes if they have enough time and they really want to pull it off.
Once a Ranger is not good.
Now, a lot of people say, Once a Ranger is a really good anniversary season, while many others say is bad. And where do I fall into that? I'm kind of in the middle. I think the main reason why a lot of people don't like it is because ultimately the Overdrive cast wasn't done very well throughout the season as it was. But then when you have this whole problem where the Rangers simply quit, move on to their lives, and don't really care about what's going on. It's also a compound problem because in the past we had several Ranger characters already doing this where they were tired of it, like Will constantly wanting to quit, or we had annoying characters in general that we didn't like. It fed into that problem. Now, on the other hand, the reason why a lot of people say Once a Ranger is good is technically because, for the most part, majority of anniversary episodes suck. And that's just an unfortunate problem. Either because they have too little time, or they're in a season that's just so not liked, or there's just either they focus too much on one particular character. Ultimately, when they pick the Rangers to come back, they pick pretty much all the favorites that people loved. Tori, Kira, Bridge, and they continued, the story of SVD because Bridge became the Red Ranger. We have Adam, so they picked the perfect group of Rangers, which is why a lot of people really like it. And they did bring back Alpha 6, even though it had the wrong voice, but still, it was there, and they kind of expanded on certain things. Although, the whole morphing grid thing was they took it too literal, where Alpha goes into a grid place, and that sucked. That I'll never defend. But that is the main reason why Once a Ranger is considered good in a lot of people's cases, but a lot of people can still also hate it at the same time.
Megaforce was good.
Now, this bad take is really hard to, defend. Now, obviously, I'm in the camp of, Megaforce was not good. Now, does it mean everything of Megaforce Last Super Megaforce was bad? No, of course not. But overall, because of Troy's hidden backstory gets dropped or not cared about, you know, them overall being completely neglected as characters. Several characters are compromised because they're switching between two different Sentai seasons and their personalities get all over the place, like Jake specifically. And we do have like a few characters that you do like Robo Knight, but because we switch over to Super Megaforce, he's no longer in the footage, so they simply drop him, and then we have to constantly go back and forth. So there's a lot of reasons why people don't like it. Another reason why there are people who can like Megaforce is because it depends on when you grew up. If you grew up in, you know, in the 2010s, you were a kid, and then you experienced Power Rangers from basically Samurai and on, and that was your first season. Now, of course, another thing that influences that is when you're young, you have not experienced all the types of storytelling, writing, characterization, things like that. So everything is new to you. So when you watch a TV show that overall is not really liked by a lot of people because this was done better in previous seasons, you don't understand that because you're just seeing it from that current level of quality. So you think that's the best it can be. Another factor of that is because you grew up in a specific time period, you usually will not go back and watch, you know, an older season because A, it's the style of the time doesn't suit you anymore. It was just from that era. For example, there are a great amount of black and white movies and TV shows like The Twilight Zone, Citizen Kane, you know, iconic classic films, but majority of people will not watch them at all because they're simply black and white, or they could be simply slow, or it just showcases, you know, elements of the past that people just don't really care about. So the same thing happens here.
Power Rangers 2017 is the best version.
Just like how people can or cannot like RPM, same thing with Megaforce, this happens as well. A lot of reasons why people do or don't like reboots is for, you know, personal preferences. Me, for example, I usually hate remakes or reboots because one, it comes down to why are we doing this? We've already had a movie or a TV show that's already done this, and the real only difference is going to be, oh, they're going to have better visual effects. But I personally don't care about that. Once you do something, I really don't want to see it in any other fashion. Now, you can make the argument, oh, well, what about like if it was a cartoon series and you turn it into live action? To me, it's the same thing. Now, the medium it's in is different. It's what makes it good. But then the other problem that happens whenever they do remakes or reboots, the writers, producers, whatever, decide to let's change everything. And then I'm saying to myself, if you were so bent on changing everything because you don't want to just simply repeat it, it defeats the purpose of being a remake. If you're going to remake something, see if it's successful or not. If you're going to change all the core elements of, you know, whatever it is to something different, you might as well make a completely different movie. Now, I don't hate the 2017 movie overall, but there are a ton of changes that where I was saying to myself, if you're going to just change virtually everything about the characters, bar their names and what Ranger color they're associated with, because that's basically what they did, you might as well have just created an original Ranger team for the 2017 movie, and it didn't have to be MMPR at all. It could have just been a Power Rangers film with the original cast, because virtually everyone was different. Jason is no longer a martial arts instructor. He was a guy who loved doing pranks and stole that cow, for example. This is a alternate, you know, universe from the TV show. So you could virtually do anything. Now, obviously, well, if you can virtually do anything, well, what's the difference of them changing all the characters? There's no more baggage of the, you know, the characters are supposed to be based on, so who cares? So that's the reason why a lot of people did not like the Power Rangers movie. But for me, if you were going to make a more serious Power Rangers season or movie, use an original cast and don't use anything from the old shows. Start out fresh, start out original, and that will give you the best chance because you won't have anything to, you know, argue about except were these characters good? Did you respect Power Rangers in general sense? I think that would have worked better, and that's why we have this, you know, discourse between of like the 2017 movie sucks. No, it doesn't. It was really good. And that's where it comes from.
Zeo is an overrated season.
Now, I've heard this before where, you know, many people don't really care about Zeo because, you know, it's just a continuation of MMPR. All it is we still have the exact same actors, bar Tanya. Basically, the Machine Empire is a repeat of either Rita or Zed or amalgamation of the two. I agree on this to a point that it is more of the same. You know, even the opening, the original band that sung the MMPR theme, and it was still pretty much the same way. Even It's Morphin' Time is still used as their call out to morph, things like that. So it's very samey. I did like Zeo, don't get me wrong. And it's not because, oh, the suits were magical. It was a final actual step forward. But the characters do feel like they were growing up. We were kind of in this weird holding pattern when it came to MMPR Season 3. And I think that's what ultimately damaged Zeo. Because if we had, like, say, for example, went from Season 1 and 2 of MMPR and didn't do Season 3 at all, there was so much baggage of MMPR. It was for 3 years. That is a very long time. It's 150 episodes. Now, like I said, I love the new Zords, the refreshed look. But yeah, story-wise, it was weak, and that was the fault of the production team in general. And on top of it, we still had Rita, Zed, and everyone being idiots behind the scenes. They were still in the show when they should have all either A, just left, or got killed off. So there was a lot of like, we don't want to fully go away from MMPR because we're afraid that it'll get our show canceled, versus let's go to something new. And that's been a problem that PR has suffered for many, many years. We all today, when Samurai began and they all, said it's Morphin' Time, and or they just rip off the stupid, MMPR theme song for so many years in a row, we've hated that too. I understand as a business, you don't want to go away from your bread and butter, but you're going to become stale at a certain point where you have to go away from what made you successful, and you have to figure out a way to continue that success with new things.
Carone was a better Pink Ranger.
This one's a hard one because I can understand both perspectives. Now, I liked both Kendricks and Carone. Now, Carone has a lot more, story to her because, again, she was Astronema, and we have that entire journey that she went through in space. So when she comes in, she has a lot more, background and information that came in. While with Kendricks, she was a completely new character at the time, and because unfortunately she left so early on because of, she had cancer, she had no choice, they had to write her out, they couldn't really develop the character in any real direction. Now, of course, there were certain things hinted here and there. I mean, she did have the Maya episode where, Maya ate her cake, and they had that whole argument. But again, it's a character piece, but it's not a character progression. And of course, Kendricks had that little thing of hint of, does she like Leo? Does Leo like her? So we had that, but again, because everything was so abruptly cut off. And she did have that, whole thing of, figuring out the, Galaxy book and the Lost Galactic Beast. She had those moments, but overall, she didn't get much to do. But with Carone, because she had her background, and because they decided to continue her story, where she had a lot of decent focus episodes, even though the whole Battleizer one was a mess, she still was very important. So I could see why people love Carone over Kendricks in that regard. It is very difficult to pick, like, which Pink Ranger was better, because, Kendricks has hers and Carone has hers. I do have to agree, Carone has the overall better story. It was just that Kendricks was robbed of any potential story that could have been, developed. What if they had done some sort of, like, rival between Deviant and Kendricks, where, because she was good with the Galactic Beast, maybe she was also had the tendency of figuring out what Deviant's plans were, and it would make sense to use her expertise in that area to make something unique for the character. So for me, I can't pick who's the better Pink Ranger in the regard, but I can understand why people pick Carone as the better Pink Ranger.
Ninja Steel is okay if you get rid of Victor and Monty.
Now, I agree, Victor and Monty are one, if not the most annoying / bad things that came out of Ninja Steel. This is no disrespect for the actors. They went in, they came to do their roles, and that's it. And they did a fine job in that regard. It was ultimately the higher ups, the producers / the writers are the ones who directed the way they did Victor and Monty. Every season always has a Bulk and Skull-like character. They're done in very similar ways, or in the general sense of just having a funny character. Boom is the Bulk and Skull character for SPD. Devin and Cassidy are the Bulk and Skull characters of Dino Thunder, things like that. And I don't have a problem when you have, similar analogs of those elements back in PR, because there are times where you need lighthearted characters. The problem is Victor and Monty had gone so beyond what was comical, it bordered on like we were seeing a Looney Tunes skit. And that's what really made everyone hate them. It's not the fact that they did a farting joke. I never liked farting jokes or poop jokes, but it goes as far as them inflating the stupid spider sack that they were tied in to make them fly off into the air. And on top of it, no one cared that they were flying off and they could easily die. So it shows you how like very juvenile Power Rangers got. I could kind of see it from the producer's perspective. Now, like Saban, who's worked on the show since MMPR in some capacity, he liked Bulk and Skull. Yeah, there are times where they've fallen on tables or things fell on them, but it was slapstick humor that was very grounded. So if a pizza or a cake flies into Bulk and Skull, we're okay with that. But when it comes to idiotic things where it's just like floating away in the sky and no one caring about it, you lose the believability of the entire season. But I don't agree with that if you got rid of Victor and Monty, Ninja Steel would be much better. No. They are a huge problem with Ninja Steel, but there's a ton of other issues. Redbot being worthless, Mick being info dumping, or moral of the week where he has to basically talk to kids in that sense. Now, Power Rangers, of course, has morals and other things to help, kids understand situations and whatnot. That's always been a thing. But the point is that you cannot do it in such a very PBS way where it's just directly in front of your face and then you're just having the character talk about it. That's what people don't like. People don't like seeing those type of things because it's just a PSA at that point. So you had that. All the characters were like all over the place. They were either annoying, lack of development, or in the worst case like Sarah being such a genius. And that's not a problem because Billy is a genius as well. He's invented tons of machinery and whatnot. But Billy, for the most part, those inventions were hidden and specifically only made for when he's a ranger. I could see the reasons why when they came up with Sarah and they're like, well, Billy's done this in MMPR. In most cases, it's all hidden and not shown in public. While in Sarah's case, she's doing things that are in public, and not only that, solving, world issues with the magic cookie maker. And then that's why everyone points out, well, you shouldn't have done something like that. Or the dumb issues like with Redbot when they finally gave him that one episode, but it was so ridiculous that no one liked it and they hated Redbot even more. And so even if you did try to fix Victor and Monty to be at the level of Bulk and Skull, nothing else would have changed.
The final 13 episodes of Overdrive were good.
Now, obviously, a lot of people do not like Overdrive. I don't like Overdrive. Now, has it improved over the years compared to other seasons? Yes, I will openly admit, Overdrive compared to recent bad seasons is not as bad as it was before. Initially, seasons start off as okay, but the last 13 episodes of Overdrive being good, no. The main problem that comes from is the fact that you still had all the issues with the characters not being used well. Dax, Ronnie especially. I think the main thing where you look at the final few episodes of that arc is that, they're getting closer to the Corona Aurora. The stakes are, coming back in. They have to find it. What's going to happen to Moltor and Flurious and, the whole... Taizon's fiance comes into play in that matter, so I could see why a lot of people do like it, because it was actually finally bringing in the story elements that were initially set up in the beginning of the season, the biggest one being Mac, where he finally finds out he was a robot, and then he hated his father. So, like I've said in the past, I love Mac's storyline for that, but it still does not make up for all the nonsense that still was going on. The villains were all over the place where they just didn't care about them because, again, it came down to them not wanting to use the Bokender stuff, which is fine. I've always said Power Rangers does not have to use all the storylines in Super Sentai to do their show, but you have to come up with something equally good or better to replace this footage. Overdrive was notorious of not doing that. So we had characters like Dax have nothing because the elements that they had in Bokender was not used. Will, again, nothing because the elements from Bokender that had his backstory of him going evil, they didn't do. So I can't agree that the last, 13 episodes were good.
The Morphing Masters shouldn't have been revealed.
Now this one, there's a lot of factors in this particular case because there's a lot of elements from the comic books that I don't really look at, so I don't really know how people feel overall. But I actually do agree on this. I know in some cases, the Morphing Masters are a good element to Power Rangers in general. It is a throwback of old elements from MMPR that just never got explained, and it was just a one-off thing that they had to do in order to explain Japanese footage. The Dino Fury writers were like, well, let's take elements from here that, like, they never got to use, which is great. I love it when writers go into a franchise and they're like, oh, I remember this happening 30 plus years ago when I was a kid, and it never got answered. Let me actually think of a story to come up and explain this. I love that. The problem is the Morphing Masters turned into a problem. The name itself is why this happened. You have characters that are literally the masters of the morphing grid. Now, another problem that's developed from this is that the morphing grid can do virtually anything. Now, when we knew about the morphing grid, all we really knew about it in the beginning was that it was the place where all the Rangers' gear and stuff were stored in this place of energy where they can access it with their morphers and their suits appear, their weapons appear, things like that. But then the morphing grid, from RPM and on, it got expanded on where it can actually control life and death or bring people back depending on conditions. But when Dino Fury also introduced us to Morphing Masters directly, as they are people or characters, basically gods, the problem with that is that you are now dealing with beings that should be super powerful. I have no issues with dealing with any type of villains, but then at the same time you have some characters that are like, well, I want to help the Rangers in order to stop them, while you have other of the Morphing Masters that don't want to help because they don't want to interfere with this, where it doesn't really work logically. So you have these issues of well, why did Trini die? But while Zato didn't die in Dino Fury, it's just what are the two differences? So a lot of times fans have to make explanations of a situation to make things work, while it really should be the writer's case of, okay, we set up these characters that have this immense power. How do we deal with things like Trini dying, while in Zato's case he survived? They should have thought of things like that to explain. Ultimately, they caused more problems instead of actually helping the universe grow, because, oh, we have this linking element that continued on 30 years later. Now, I'm actually in either camp. I do like them for what they did, but I do hate them for what the powers they have. Now, could things be explained in Cosmic Fury? Because at the time of this video, it hasn't come out yet. So could they explain how Zed escaped? A god, basically? They could.
Dax is a good character.
Now, of course, I had to bring in my own personal bad take, is that, I think everyone will know that I've liked Dax, even though the character has been completely worthless in Overdrive. Especially when you come to the civilian powers. I've always hated the civilian powers of Power Rangers, not because they're dumb ideas. I like the concept, but the problem is, because it never exists in Super Sentai, these abilities just never show up in the Power Rangers suits at all, when logically these powers should be working alongside the suits. And then Overdrive was notorious of never using these powers when they should be very useful in a lot of situations. But speaking of Dax, no one likes Dax because all he does is just reference endlessly, oh, here, Power Rangers title. Dax, on the other hand, can interrupt the fight scene with a dumb joke. For the 9 out of 10 times, he's just annoying. But I still did like him, because to me, Dax is very much like Ziggy in RPM. Ziggy can be annoying, but I think Ziggy at least had a personality that you can follow through, and then he got a lot of backstory. What did Dax have? Besides, just being a reference machine and being kind of funny, overall more annoying than being an actually funny character. So that's the reason why a lot of people hate Dax. But sometimes characters just work with me, and I didn't find Dax annoying. But no matter what situation or series, there's always going to be someone that likes it, no matter how bad a TV show is. Will anything ever be agreed on 100% of people? No. Ultimately, that will never happen. There will always be someone that likes something, and there will always be someone that hates something. Now, if you have a suggestion or idea on what topic you'd like me to cover in a future video, leave a comment down below, and I may use it next time.